The time I cursed the fig tree, a lesson in fruitfulness. I was hungry, physically drained and spiritually empty after my battle in the temple. We walked into the silent dawn, and I saw the perfect lie. A magnificent fig tree, prematurely lush with every boastful green leaf, yet utterly hollow inside. It promised life, but offered nothing but deceit. And in that moment, standing by the roadside, I used my power not to heal the sick, but to deliver a focused, instantaneous judgment. I spoke 3 chilling words that shocked my closest friends, a lesson that would teach them more about faith, power, and finality than any sermon. You're about to hear the full story. The time I cursed the fig tree. Don't miss a single step of this journey. Hit the subscribe button now, and let's explore the true cost of conviction. The day before had been a torrent of concentrated fury. The cleansing of the temple, the overturned tables, the crack of the cord whip, the shouts echoing off the massive stones. That day had drained me of all reserve. It was an expenditure of righteous anger and spiritual focus required to confront the hypocrisy that had made the house of prayer a den of thieves. That kind of action leaves the body hollow, the spirit exposed. Now, as the dawn broke over Jerusalem, casting long, pale shadows across the olive groves, we were walking back from Bethany. The sun promised a brutal heat, but the immediate pressure was the gnawing in my stomach. I was moving, but every step was heavy, a physical manifestation of the mental toll I constantly paid. My body was demanding sustenance, simple human fuel, to face the inevitable confrontations the new day would bring from the Sanhedrin. This intense physical need, however, was about to intersect with a deeper spiritual hunger for fruitfulness, for substance that matched appearance. And the collision would result in a teaching moment sharper and more indelible than any parable. The sight of a promising tree, nestled just off the path, was about to become the perfect tragic symbol of a failing nation. My ordinary life was defined by 2 things: constant motion and relentless expectation. There was no routine of quiet prayer or simple work anymore, only the exhausting rhythm of teaching and traveling, always pressed by the crowds, always pursued by the authorities. We started most days in Bethany, finding brief solace in the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, but the stillness was always temporary. As the sun crested the hills, the need would begin. We would gather our cloaks, cinch our belts, and begin the 2-mile walk toward Jerusalem. This walk, repeated countless times, was my ordinary life. This path, particularly near the holy city, was a landscape of appearances. You would see the towering white marble of the Temple Mount glistening in the distance, the perfection of ritual purity, outwardly glorious, inwardly corrupt. You would pass groups of Pharisees, their tzitzit fringes long and meticulously clean, their phylacteries broad, outward signs of deep, rigorous piety, masking hearts of stone. You would see the merchants returning from the city, their expressions of reverence quickly replaced by hard, calculating eyes. My companions, the disciples, had fallen into a kind of ordinary, patient rhythm. They walked in their usual order, Peter always near the front, bursting with restless energy, John and James close behind, discussing the implications of the previous day's teachings. They were accustomed to my silence during these walks, knowing I was either communing with the Father or preparing the words for the day's crowds. The ordinary expectation of this journey was simple. The day would begin with a search for physical provision, followed immediately by the spiritual and political demands of the temple courts. We needed food, and we expected the land to provide what it promised. The landscape was alive with expectation. It was spring, the time when nature awoke from its slumber, bursting with the promise of harvest. Fig trees, in particular, were known to be honest providers. The early figs, the bokor, typically appear on the branches before the large leaves. The leaves are the great advertising sign. A tree covered in deep, broad foliage in the early season proclaims loudly to all who see it, "I am fruitful. Look here, and you will find sustenance. This ordinary reliance on the honesty of the natural world, that a fig tree with leaves would have fruit, was deeply embedded in the culture and critically in the spiritual metaphor of my teaching. Israel itself was often symbolized as a fig tree. The expectation was that where there was outward display, leaves, there would be inward substance, fruit. This particular morning, the rhythm of my ordinary life was acutely physical. The body, drained by the temple's spiritual violence, demanded energy. My human need was simple, primal, and immediate. As we rounded a dusty bend on the road to Bethphage, the promise of relief suddenly materialized in the form of a singularly impressive fig tree, standing alone by the wayside. It was a magnificent specimen, far more lush than others we had passed. Its leaves were abundant, thick, and dark green, signifying a robust life force, and crucially, a premature development that should have already yielded edible fruit. It was the perfect, grand advertisement of provision, and in my state of acute hunger, I moved toward it with a focused, almost instinctual hope. The ordinary of my life, the search for provision, was about to lead to a shocking moment of barren confrontation. The crack in my exhausted composure, the first hint of profound disappointment, was triggered by the simplest, most human of needs: hunger. We had been walking for a significant time. The sun was climbing rapidly, pouring heat onto the dusty road. The hunger, having started as a low background hum, was now a loud, demanding presence. I felt the lightheadedness that comes from physical depletion, a constant reminder of my humanity despite the divine mission. The sight of the fig tree provided a jolt of anticipatory relief. It was impossible to miss. While other trees along the path still held a sparse, developing canopy, this one was a riot of green. It stood out as an anomaly, a flourishing, magnificent specimen, prematurely and extravagantly clothed in dense leaves. I moved toward it quickly, my pace increasing. The disciples, sensing my focus, followed silently, perhaps equally eager for the immediate refreshment the sight promised. This tree, by all the natural laws of its kind, should have had fruit. It was a sign of health and abundance, a visual guarantee of nourishment available now, months before the typical harvest. This visual promise was the crack, the immediate profound moment where expectation met reality. I recall the sensory details vividly. The tree's leaves, when I reached them, were broad and provided a cooling shade that was deceptive. I pushed through the outer layers of foliage, expecting the firm, sugar-sweet bumps of the early figs. My fingers traced the smaller branches, searching for the telltale shape of the bokor. The air under the canopy smelled only of fresh leaf sap and dry earth, not the heavier, sweet aroma of ripening fruit. My initial movement was physical. The realization was instantly spiritual. The disappointment was not merely the loss of a meal, it was the sudden, sharp confrontation with lies. The tree had spent all its resources on appearance. It had prioritized the outward display of lush leaves, the symbol of life, health, and spiritual status, while neglecting the fundamental purpose of its existence: fruitfulness. It was a grand, beautiful, and utterly empty advertisement. The crack widened into a deep fissure of recognition. This was not just a hungry man finding no food. This was a teacher confronting the perfect, living metaphor for everything I had spent the last day railing against in the temple. The temple, like this tree, was magnificent. It boasted glorious architecture and constant, complicated ritual, the leaves. Yet, it was spiritually barren. It produced no true worship, no justice, no compassion, no fruit, only a cover for exploitation and greed. The intense, concentrated rage that had powered my actions in the temple began to stir again, not against the tree itself, but against the principle it embodied. The crack was the moment I realized that this tree's failure was not accidental or mundane. It was a cosmic insult to the very nature of creation, which dictates that appearance must correspond to substance. I stepped back, withdrawing my hand from the barren branches. The disciples were watching, confusion beginning to ripple through their silent observance. They saw only a man who was still hungry. I saw the ultimate failure of promise, and I knew instantly that this small, isolated tree by the wayside and away from the city would serve as the most crucial and perhaps the most misunderstood lesson of the entire week. Its death was not punishment for my hunger, but a necessary symbolic act of judgment against spiritual deception. My patience, already frayed by the physical exhaustion and the previous day's spiritual battle, evaporated. The small, irritating hunger metastasized into a burning theological certainty. I had sought simple food and found instead the perfect, tragic illustration of hypocrisy. The crack was now ready to become the breaking point. The moment I stepped away from the tree, my mind solidified its decision. This was my breaking point. The decision to apply a symbolic, dramatic judgment to a natural object to illustrate an eternal spiritual law. My anger was not a fit of pique. It was the intense, concentrated frustration of confronting absolute deceit in a world where truth was desperately needed. I had sought life, fruit, and found only the empty facade of life, leaves. I turned back to the tree which stood there, oblivious in its lush green self-absorption. I could feel the disciples tense behind me. They were expecting a sermon, a parable, perhaps a weary sigh. They were not prepared for the pure, unmediated power of a spoken curse. I spoke, my voice low and utterly devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of creation itself. The words were not an explosive shout, but a focused, chilling command that bypassed the physical process of decay and targeted the very source of its being, its root, its life force. Let no man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. The command hung in the humid morning air. It was a formal, definite, and absolute sentence. The immediate reaction was a blend of confusion and alarm from the disciples. Mark, in particular, looked bewildered. They had seen me heal the sick, feed the thousands, and calm the storm. All these acts were restoration, bringing life or order where there was chaos or illness. This was different. This was destruction. It was the first and only time I had used the immense power resident within me not to create, but to instantaneously end. Peter, ever the direct observer, audibly muttered his confusion. Why curse the tree? It is not the season for figs. His thought was accurate on a practical level, but fundamentally missed the point. He saw the calendar. I saw the symbol. If a tree had such prominent leaves in the early season, it was genetically and physically obligated to have the early figs. Its failure to produce was a profound biological lie. The breaking point was not the moment the power left me, but the moment I chose to illustrate the truth that spiritual fraud demands consequences. It was an act of teaching by destruction, meant to shock my companions out of their complacency and focus them on the spiritual state of the temple, which was the truly barren entity. The sheer difficulty of the act was immense. Commanding nature to wither its own life source required a focused expenditure of will, far beyond the casual commands that resulted in healing. Healing involves aligning the human body with the natural desire for wholeness. This involved forcing an organism to reverse its natural, life-sustaining function. I felt a sharp, secondary wave of exhaustion wash over me, reinforcing the physical drain that had led to the moment. I had paid a heavy price for this brief, symbolic act. Yet once the words were spoken, the moment passed. The tree remained visibly green, its abundance mocking the words just spoken. No lightning struck, no leaves instantly crumbled. The disciples looked at the tree, then at me, then back at the tree, unsure if they had witnessed a miracle or merely the frustrated utterance of a weary, hungry man. They heard the curse, but they did not yet see the effect. I did not explain. I simply turned and continued toward the city. The most important part of the day lay ahead, the renewed confrontation with the barren temple authorities. The tree's fate was sealed, but its lesson had not yet germinated in the minds of my companions. The breaking point was over, but the teaching was yet to begin. I had delivered the sentence. They would witness the execution the following day. The silence of the walk was now charged with the lingering tension of a profound mystery, a curse spoken for a purpose far greater than a missed breakfast. We spent the rest of that day in Jerusalem, locked in intense debates with the chief priests and the elders, confronting them directly on their authority. The cleansing of the temple had been the physical action. The debates were the verbal assault on their power structure. The entire day was a testament to the barrenness the fig tree symbolized. As night fell, we retreated back to Bethany. The memory of the fig tree was likely fading in the minds of my disciples, overshadowed by the intense political drama in the temple courts. But in my mind, the command remained a fixed point, an unalterable certainty. The profound shift occurred the next morning as we returned to the city. The tree was still visible from a distance, standing by the wayside, a familiar landmark. As we drew closer, however, Peter, who was walking ahead, stopped dead in his tracks. His pause was so abrupt, so shocked, that it brought the entire group to a halt. Peter stared at the tree, then back at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and genuine fright. "Master, behold, the fig tree which you cursed is withered away." He was not exaggerating. The withering was absolute. It had not merely lost its leaves. It was bone dry, shriveled and dead from the roots up. It looked not like a tree that had died over months, but like a tree that had been erased from life overnight by a concentrated act of anti-creation. The great, lush advertisement of the day before was now a skeletal monument to immediate, irreversible failure. This was the true shift. It transformed the curse from a frustrated utterance into a divine, demonstrable sign. The disciples, clustering around the dead tree, were not just impressed, they were terrified by the sheer, effortless finality of the act. The power they had previously associated with my touch, healing, or my physical presence, calming the storm, was now revealed as inherent in my mere spoken word. There was no prayer, no ritual, no laying on of hands, just the spoken command of absolute judgment. Peter's reaction perfectly encapsulated the revelation. The focus shifted entirely from the reason for the curse, my hunger, the tree's barrenness, to the power behind the curse, faith and the spoken word. They now understood that the true miracle lay in the time delay, the silent, invisible power of the word to operate over hours, affecting the tree at its fundamental sustaining core, the roots, while the outward appearance remained initially unchanged. The external life was a lie, and the word had instantaneously addressed the hidden truth. I used the shock of the withered tree as the critical bridge to the deeper lesson. I ignored the dead wood before us and looked directly at my disciples, using the raw terror in their eyes to anchor the new truth. "Have faith in God," I began. The lesson that followed was the profound shift I had intended all along. I was not teaching them about horticulture or vengeance. I was teaching them about their own potential. The command, "If you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' it will happen." The power of the spoken word, fueled by absolute belief, was the essence of the shift. The fig tree was merely a dramatic prop, sacrificed to demonstrate that faith is not a passive hope, but an active, commanding force. It was the moment they realized that the power I wielded was not an exclusive property, but a potential available to any heart, anchored by pure, unshakable belief. The tree died so that their faith might live and grow beyond anything they had previously conceived. The purpose of the withered fig tree was twofold: to provide a living parable about the fate of the spiritually barren, and to deliver a radical teaching on the power of mountain-moving faith and prayer. I gathered the disciples around the silent, stark monument of the tree, its skeletal frame now serving as an unintended permanent landmark. My voice was patient, firm, and focused entirely on the future, not the past. The first purpose was to address the context of our current location, Jerusalem. The fig tree was Israel, lush with the leaves of the law, the traditions, and the ritual, but utterly devoid of the fruit of justice, love, and genuine worship. It advertised life, yet offered nothing but shade and deceit. By condemning the tree, I was pronouncing a visual, undeniable judgment on a religious system that had prioritized outward appearance over internal transformation. The curse was a final, sorrowful declaration that the temple, which was all stone and ceremony, would soon meet a similar permanent fate, withered from the root. The true revolutionary purpose, however, was directed at my disciples. I needed them to internalize the lesson of the word's power. Truly, I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, "Be taken up and thrown into the sea," it will happen. The command was absolute, and the comparison from a fig tree to a mountain was designed to be hyperbolically shocking. The mountain was the Temple Mount itself, the epicenter of their history, their identity, and their faith. I was telling them that the power I used to kill a tree could be transferred to them, to literally uproot the entire foundation of their world, provided they possessed pure, undoubting faith. This was the crux of the lesson, the core of my purpose. Faith as a verb, not a noun. I emphasized that this power was inextricably linked to the nature of their prayer and their relationships. And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. But the power was not for personal glory or destruction. It was for the advancement of the kingdom, and therefore it required a heart cleansed of unforgiveness. Whenever you stand praying, forgive, if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. The withered tree became the ultimate teaching aid, demonstrating the consequences of spiritual barrenness, while simultaneously serving as a launching pad for the most radical lesson on personal power and responsibility. I was not only telling them that I was the Son of God, but that they, through their faith, were connected to the same source of generative and commanding power. The purpose was to shift their thinking from passive obedience to active creative command. They had been observers of miracles. I was teaching them to become conduits of the divine act. The memory of the dead tree, standing there as a testament to the instantaneous power of the spoken word, would forever remind them of the radical nature of the faith I demanded. A faith capable of transforming the natural world, and more importantly, transforming the world of men. The fig tree had died so that the seed of true operative faith could be planted in their souls. The impact of the cursed fig tree was silent, profound, and corrosive to the established order. It created a visible, lasting legacy that the disciples, and later their followers, could never forget. As we walked away from the withered tree, a macabre, silent witness to the power of the word, I felt the familiar exhaustion deepen. I had expended power for a teaching, for a necessary symbol, but I had received no physical nourishment. The lesson came at a cost, both to the tree and to my own human fatigue. Yet the price was necessary. The closing impact was primarily internal for the disciples. They had witnessed an act of power that defied all their previous understandings. Healing was grace. The curse was judgment. And the core realization was this: my power was not magical, it was volitional. The ability to wither a tree or move a mountain was rooted not in some innate divine trickery, but in the absolute alignment of will and belief, a belief I was commissioning them to acquire. The withered fig tree, standing by the wayside, became an enduring, powerful monument to several truths. Consequence of hypocrisy. For the people who heard the story, the dead tree was a stark warning. Outward show without internal substance is an invitation to divine removal. It was a prophecy of the coming desolation of the temple, which would eventually be swept clean of its leaves and its fruit. The authority of the word. The disciples realized that my power was not dependent on location, ritual, or proximity. It was the word itself that carried the executive force of creation. They were witnessing the creative word in reverse, the unmaking of a promise, the radical nature of faith. Most critically, the tree's demise was the foundation for the teaching that they too could command the impossible. The goal was never to teach them how to kill trees, but how to uproot mountains of doubt, injustice, and sin, using the same force of concentrated faith. The ultimate impact lay in the unsettling nature of the event. While healing brought joy and celebration, the curse brought sober reflection and a healthy fear of the consequences of empty living. It taught them that the kingdom of God was not merely about comforting the afflicted, it was also about confronting and removing all that was spiritually barren and deceptive. That day, the fig tree was not the main story. The main story was the sudden, radical expansion of the disciples' understanding of faith. They had watched a tree die so that a profound, destabilizing truth could live within them. The shadow of that withered tree would follow them, a silent challenge that demanded they perpetually examine their own lives, their own ministries, and their own hearts for the presence of fruit that matched the outward promise of their faith. The final impact wasn't the death of a tree, but the birth of a radical, terrifying realization in my disciples' souls, that their own faith, their own spoken word, could command the impossible. The withered fig tree became a permanent monument to a vital truth, that outward appearance without internal substance is a lie that invites consequences. I left them with a challenge to look past the leaves and produce the fruit of justice and love. The question remains for us today: are you merely showing leaves, or are you bearing fruit? If this intense chapter of conviction and consequence challenges your own understanding of belief, make sure to share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more untold stories of power and purpose, and comment below, what mountain do you need to move in your life? I carried the exhaustion of that day, the hunger and the immense drain, as a quiet reminder of the sacrifice required to teach the purest form of truth. The fig tree, in its death, served its highest purpose, a lasting, visible testament to the fact that when divine expectation meets human barrenness, a verdict will be rendered by the power of the spoken word.